Welcome back to Grief Inspired. My name is McNulty, and I bring light to the darkness of grief. And I hope that if you're here and you're watching these videos, that I'm bringing light to the darkness of your grief, which is what I want to do. So if I can help you, I want to encourage you to reach out to me. My email is in the comments below. Send me a message. Let me know what's going on with you and what you need, because the idea behind Grief Inspired is to make sure that you are not grieving alone, because I know what a lonely experience it can be, because I did it alone and I don't want that for you. So today we're talking about post-traumatic growth, and this is a term you may or may not have heard of, but again, it's a term that was defined in the 1990s by a couple of therapists. And these terms are really terms that we can use as a framework to talk about what we're going through when it relates to trauma or struggle or anything that's emotionally challenging. And in this case, we'll relate it to grief. But the premise behind post-traumatic growth is that trauma and going through trauma can leave you as a person transformed. And the idea is that by enduring what is considered to be psychological struggle after some type of adversity, it can lend itself toward you finding some positive growth as you resolve that trauma. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, is if you're here and you're looking at videos to help you through your grief, then it's very likely that grief is trauma. And again, it's traumatic to go through the loss of someone very, very close to you. And so when we talk about post-traumatic growth, what we're talking about is really hope. Having hope and knowing that you can be transformed, that you can grow through the psychological struggle that is grief. Now, like I said, this was a theory that was defined and developed in the 1990s. And there's three key things that need to be involved to consider it post-traumatic growth. And they are that your core beliefs need to be challenged so much so that you have to seek a new belief system. And so my question for you is, do you feel like that's the way it is for you in your grief, right? Is life as you know it being challenged? And the way you look at the world being challenged? For me, absolutely it was. The second one is that you're enduring psychological trouble, right? So you're asking questions like, why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? What does this all mean? And how am I going to view the world differently because of this? Again, deep grief is traumatic and really leads you to, really working through things mentally, emotionally, psychologically, to understand what your life is like now without your loved one in it, right? So all of that change. And then finding personal growth, right, is another element of post-traumatic growth, right? That you're growing personally. So what I do here at Grief Inspired is I really encourage that growth. Because for me, what I believe is that growth is really where healing comes from. And it's where you're releasing some of the struggle, some of the challenges, some of the suffering that you're really been going through as part of your grief. So that's why my premise has been and always will be: lean into your grief, look at it, see where you can grow, see what's going on, how is it affecting you? Because by doing that inquiry and getting educated and using the tools that I share here and in my courses, even my journal here, right? This is designed to help you with that growth piece. That's really going to help you. So going back specifically to post-traumatic growth, right? So it has to challenge your core belief. You have to be enduring psychological trouble. And then you have to be willing to find personal growth. And it's the personal growth that really leads to what they're calling post-traumatic growth. And then as the result of post-traumatic growth, they list 5 different areas where you should be able to see some positive response to the adversity, to your grief, to the struggle that you've gone through, right? And so again, this is applying not only to grief, to any type of trauma. And so positive responses are, you have an appreciation of life, right? Part of grief is learning the fragility of our lives. And so being able to say, like, life is precious. We're not all going to be here forever. And we really need to appreciate the people that we have in our lives now and the people that we've lost. So really appreciating the time that you had with them, no matter how long or how short it was. Second is that you're going to have a positive, they call it a positive response in relationships with other. Many people tell me, and I know this happened for me, is I'm a far more compassionate person and empathetic to other people's struggles because I've gone through the grief process myself. So when I hear that someone is struggling in their grief, right, it's what makes me want to reach out. And so your relationships with others is affected in a positive way. Next is the third area of positive response is new possibilities in life. And again, grief causes so much change that if you're looking for hope, and, we talked in one of the other videos where, grief is this wall that comes down in front of you and really stops the life that you expected. And you're forced to change. And so that change is going to lead to new possibilities. For me personally, there's lots of people that I know, the things that I do, the things that I love, even talking to you here on this video is a new possibility that was created for my life that I certainly didn't anticipate. And I certainly wouldn't be here talking to you today if I hadn't gone through the challenge and the struggle of losing my son. So that's another one. And then personal strength. Post-traumatic growth, as it's defined, leads to the development of personal strength, right? For me, I held my son as he passed away. And as traumatic and as overwhelming as that was for me, when I look at other things that I'm worried about or other things that could happen potentially to me, there's not a lot of other things that would really shake me any more than that had, if that makes sense. So I've developed this sense of personal strength that I have within me to say, like, I was strong enough to handle that. I was strong enough to survive his death, to continue to function, right, for the first couple of years before I really started to learn more about my grief and really find ways to come out of my grief, or as I call it, go after the learning of my grief, right? And so that's a personal strength that I have. And I can guarantee that if you look at your grief journey from where you started to where you are now, no matter how far or how long it's been, you are personally stronger than you were when you started this because you've had to endure. And so, that's an opportunity for you to congratulate yourself for as far as you've come and what you've made it through, because you are developing personal strength. And as you continue to work through your grief, learn more through my videos or attend my courses or use my grief journal, all of these things are going to help you move forward in your grief, and it's going to help you gain this personal strength that we're talking about. And then finally, the fifth area is the creation of spiritual change. So post-traumatic growth will often cause spiritual change, meaning that you look at what you believe, or what you did believe, or what you were taught, and oftentimes that spirituality that you have, or how you look at that, can change. For me, it absolutely did. For me, I talk in another one of my videos how, I grew up Catholic. And so the difference for me when talking about spiritual change, when you dive into like, how did this happen, and how does God let this happen, and why is there struggle in the world, and why do people get cancer, and why are people murdered and killed and overdosed and able to, go through all of the things that are tragic in our lives, it creates spiritual change. And so I uncoupled my Catholicism, my religion, with my relationship with God. That was the spiritual change that I had. And I learned what I considered to be, the meaning of life, and that the life is that we're all here and these things happen and there isn't a lot that we can do for it. And it's not like any one of us are targeted. It's the state of the human condition. But what we can do about it is we can connect. And the reason why we're here, and this is my spiritual change, is that the reason why we're here is to help each other, to connect to other people, to use what we've learned through our post-traumatic growth, to the development of our personal strength, to all of this, to really serve and support others. And whether you do that in a really small way on a day-to-day when you're in the line at the grocery store, or with your family and friends, or if you do it on a bigger scale via a YouTube channel, or you start a nonprofit that changes the world, the scale can be different, but the reality is that there is meaning and there is purpose. And so for me, that was my spiritual change. And that's what I teach and really promote, is helping you get to where your growth is going to come from, and what you want to create, and how you can find meaning in the world. And that's what I call grief inspired, right? So this is very much, talking about post-traumatic growth in these 5 areas is very, very similar to the 3 pillars that I call the 3 pillars of Grief Inspired, meaning that, there's areas that you need to look at. And the first pillar is you need to understand your grief. You need to understand yourself in the second pillar. And then you need to understand the relationship with the rest of the world in the third pillar. So these are the changes that you go through and to create new meaning for your life. And again, as part of all that, how you're developing, whether it be Grief Inspired or what we're talking about with post-traumatic growth, is, well, you have to have access to tools. You need to get educated. I also think that the ability to surrender is super important, and realizing that you can't control everything, and that there's some things where, Gabby Bernstein says, like, put it on the altar, right? Give it to the power that's greater than you, or to just acknowledge internally that this is bigger than me and I can't control this. And so I have to, accept it. I have to surrender into it, and know that I'm going to be okay in time. And so I think that's an important part of the grief process. And then finally, being in service to others, right? The more you can serve other people as a result of your grief, or once you're in a place where you can start to look outside of yourself, transitioning from being so inwardly focused on your problems and your struggle to saying, how can I use that to really help someone else? Is really, that service to others is really going to lend itself to personal growth. So I hope that helps. Again, post-traumatic growth was developed in the 1990s. It's about the psychological struggle following adversity of any kind that really just results in positive growth. And finally, I'll leave you with this, is that I have a fundamental belief that I don't talk about all of the time because sometimes it's hard, particularly if you're newer to grief, right? I don't want to minimize anything that you're going through, but as you move through the grief process and you get further along and you move through that personal growth and the spiritual change and the new possibilities for your life, once you start getting there, you can look back and you can see what your grief has given you in that learning and in that growth. And I call those things the gifts of grief. So I wholeheartedly believe that my son Jackson gave me tremendous, tremendous gifts of grief. My 8-year-old son now, the way I interact with him, the way I look at him when we wake up in the morning, when I see his face for the first time, it reminds me how precious he is, how precious the time is, and how fragile it is. And to me, knowing that fragility makes the time that I have with him that much more special. And so that's a gift of grief. My ability to help the thousands of you that I talk to or email with or communicate with or respond to your comments here, that is a gift of my grief all day long. The way I'm more compassionate than I used to be. That is a gift of grief all day long, because the reality is I wasn't really that nice of a person. I was very inwardly focused, and I was worried about me and my career and my success and stomping on the competition and getting ahead. And that was what was most important to me. That has changed. And that is a gift of grief. And when I see other people hurting, it touches me in my heart and my soul, and I want to help because I know the intensity of that pain. That is a gift of grief. And I could go on and on because there's so many. The friends that I have now that are in the grief community, my therapist friends, the people I know, the quality people that I've made time for in my life, because sometimes you have to let people go from your life to make room for ones that are better for you. And that's a critical part of the grief process, is letting some of the toxic people go so that you can let better quality people. You're really up-leveling your friendships. It happens in grief. Tell me if that has happened to you, or if you're in a position struggling with that, tell me that too, and I can help you with that. But again, this conversation was about post-traumatic growth. I think it's so important to focus on the hope that comes out of grief. And we can spend so much time focusing on the lack and focusing on everything that we've lost. But as always, grief-inspired and being grief-inspired is saying, yes, I miss this. I am sad and I am grieving. But the time that I had with them was so precious, and I wouldn't give it away for anything, and I wouldn't change it. And I'm so glad that they were in my life for whatever period of time, and that they impacted me and they changed me and they helped make me into who I am today. And their loss has changed me too. All of these things are positive and hopeful and take you out of despair and allow you to get to that place of growth. So I hope that helped today. I hope that you understand what I'm talking about. If you have any questions about any of these topics, because I know there was a lot here, please let me know, and I will do my very best to answer all the questions that you have, because as you know, I respond to every comment that's left on my channel. That is a commitment that I make to you, because I want to make sure that you are not grieving alone. Bye for now.